Hey, so we're back for chapter 2 of Addy's Surprise. It's called Something Pretty. It's a chapter all about me. Alright. Yep. That was a joke. Anyway, early on Saturday morning, Addy set out on her errands and deliveries for Mrs. Ford. She brought a bill to a customer on Society Hill. Then she went to the dry goods store a few blocks away to pick up supplies that Mrs. Ford had ordered. The thread, buttons, ribbon, and fringe were wrapped into one parcel before Addy left the store. Addy held onto her parcel tightly as she stepped around the slush and dirty puddles in the streets. On the way to her next stop, she passed the windows of Mr. Del Monte's second-hand shop. Sometimes she and Mama went there to look for clothes or pots and pans. The socks Addy had on today had come from Mr. Del Monte's. There was a small darn in the heel of one sock, but the other was as good as new. Addy stopped for a minute to look in the window. Lying among the used shoes, wool caps, and old belts was a bright patch of red cloth. It looked like the corner of a scarf, but most of it was hidden behind a rusty tea kettle. Addy went inside to take a closer look. Mr. Del Monte recognized her right away. "Good morning, Addy," he said in his jolly way. "What brings you here today?" "Can I see that red scarf in the window?" Addy asked. Mr. Del Monte reached into the window display and moved the tea kettle so he could lift out the scarf and hand it to Addy. "It's a beauty," he said. "Hardly looks worn." Addy unfolded the scarf. It was like new. The red fabric was soft and smooth. Addy held it up to her cheek. Right then she knew she wanted Mama to have the scarf. Mama should have something pretty like this, thought Addy. She works so hard. She'd look so beautiful in this when we go to the Christmas service at church. Addy was almost afraid to ask about the price, but she looked up at Mr. Del Monte. "How much it cost?" she asked. 20 cents, answered Mr. Del Monte. "It's a good price for something that looks like it's never been worn." Addy was discouraged. She didn't have 20 cents, but she had to buy that scarf somehow. "Please, Mr. Del Monte," she said, "could you put it away for me? I'm going to try my best to get the money to buy it." "I'll put it back behind that rusty kettle again," answered Mr. Del Monte. "You're the only person who spotted it since I put it in the window last week. It'll probably stay there a little longer." "I hope so," said Addy as she carefully folded the scarf and handed it back to Mr. Del Monte. The feel of the soft material and its bright red color stayed in Addy's mind as she headed back to Mrs. Ford's shop. How am I going to get 20 cents, she wondered. So 20 cents does not sound like a lot at all. But this is 1864, and the value of money has changed with time. So 20 cents was worth about it was worth $3.32 back, like in our current currency. And if you don't have a lot of money, that can be a lot, especially since this scarf is at a secondhand store. So usually when you go to a secondhand store for us, that could be a Salvation Army store or a Goodwill or a thrift shop. If there's any like smaller ones in the area, you're not paying as much as you would for something that's brand new because it's already had a life with someone else. Not that there's anything wrong with buying things secondhand. I've bought things in thrift shops left and right. In fact, this ring, thrifted. So, it's a lot for a 9-year-old girl. Anyway. Back at the shop, Mrs. Ford had 3 packages for her to deliver, all wrapped in brown paper. So here we go. There's Addy looking at the scarf. "These go to Society Hill," said Mrs. Ford as she handed them to Addy. "Be careful, don't splash mud on them." "Yes, ma'am," said Addy. The streets were busier that afternoon than they were in the morning. Addy had to dodge around throngs of people bustling in and out of shops. Her packages were clumsy, and she worried about dropping them on the sloppy sidewalks. After Mama had worked so hard, Addy wanted to make sure the dresses were delivered in perfect condition. The last delivery was on Spruce Street. As Addy walked toward the address, she saw an old man lighting the street lamps. The lamps cast a golden glow on the wet sidewalks. When Addy got to the house, she rang the bell and waited for the big door to open. A maid finally came and Addy handed her the last bundle. "This is from Mrs. Ford's shop," she said proudly. The maid took the package and handed Addy 5 pennies. Addy thanked her and turned away. As she walked back down Spruce Street, she curled her fingers around the coins inside her mitten. Suddenly, Addy had an idea. She decided to stop by Mr. Del Monte's shop again on the way home, just to be sure the soft red scarf was still there. As she approached the store, Mr. Del Monte was just locking up. Don't worry, Addy, he said. The scarf is still here. I moved it off in the corner a bit, but you can see it if you know where to look. The two of them stood at the window together. Mr. Del Monte headed down the street, but Addy stayed at the window, thinking about her idea. If I put half my tips in the milk bottle, she thought, and keep the other half, maybe I can save enough money to buy the scarf for Mama. Addy lingered a little longer, staring at the scarf in the fading light, thinking how pretty Mama would look in it. Then she headed back to Mrs. Ford's shop. By the time she got to the shop, her feet were numb with cold and her nose felt frozen. You look frozen stiff, child, said Mrs. Ford, peering above her spectacles. Mrs. Ford had a tape measure draped around her neck. Mama had a ribbon thrown across one shoulder as she sewed fringe on the end of the sash. They looked busy, and Addy knew she shouldn't bother them. Mama, can I light the stove upstairs now? Asked Addy. Please? No, Addy, Mama answered. You know we don't light the stove until I start cooking supper. You head on upstairs. I'll be up as soon as I finish this sash, then we'll light the stove. Yes, Mama, said Addy. As she headed out the door, she heard Mrs. Ford ask Mama, How's everything up in the garret? Everything is fine, Mama answered quickly. We get by. Addy wanted to turn around and tell Mrs. Ford the truth, that it was freezing in the garret, and dark, and sometimes very lonely. On the plantation, Addy had been allowed to spend more time with Mama than she was here. She wanted to tell Mrs. Ford about the broken window and the snow on the floor, but Addy knew Mama would not want her to complain. We get by, Addy said softly to herself as she climbed the stairs. When she got to the top, she lit the candle on the table. Addy turned her mitten upside down and let her tip money fall onto the table. She brought the milk bottle out from behind the stove and set next to the money. Then Addy went over to the bed and lifted up a corner of the mattress. There she found the kerchief that she had brought from the plantation when she and Mama had escaped from slavery. Tied in one corner was the half-dime, so a nickel, Uncle Solomon had given her. It was the only money they had when they headed north for freedom. Freedom's got a cost, Uncle Solomon had said when he gave it to Addy. She had saved it for something very special, something important. Addy brought the kerchief over to the table and divided her tip money into two piles. She dropped one pile into the milk bottle and then carefully tied the other coins into the corner of her kerchief. With Uncle Solomon's half-dime, she had 10 cents in the kerchief. That was half of what she needed for Mama's red scarf. I'm halfway there, Addy thought to herself. The thought made her so happy she didn't think about the cold. So that's the end of chapter 2. The something pretty was obviously the scarf, not me. Maybe there's too pretty. Anyway, enough about my vanity. So I will see you next time for chapter 3. Hopefully we'll see if Addy saves up for that scarf. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for her. All right.